The Galactic Senate Chamber stood as a monument to interstellar diplomacy, an awe-inspiring dome of polished obsidian and glimmering alloys, where the leaders of 100 species convened to shape the laws of the known universe. The room itself, cavernous and vast, was alive with murmurs as representatives took their places in towering seats arranged in a vast circular formation. The air hummed with tension as diplomats adjusted the thick, reinforced plating of their ceremonial armor, flexing their claws, mandibles, or segmented limbs in subtle displays of dominance. Then, the humans arrived, without armor. Julian Carter strode into the chamber with an ease that unsettled the assembled politicians. Clad in nothing but the formal attire of his people, a sharp navy blue suit, he looked out of place among the armored senators who loomed over him. He moved unburdened, unguarded, his expression unreadable yet confident. The silence that followed his entrance stretched uncomfortably long. The Tarkellan senator, Zilvor, a towering reptilian with emerald scales and piercing golden eyes, let out a quiet hiss of disapproval. Beside him, Brancor the Veildar, a chitin-plated insectoid with multifaceted eyes, observed Julian with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Across the chamber, Karkesh the Molthan, a brute of a being whose body resembled living stone, scoffed openly, his voice a deep rumble. "He enters without armor," Karkesh said, his contempt barely concealed. "Do humans not value their own lives? Or are they simply ignorant of the dangers of this place?" Julian stopped at his designated seat, his gaze sweeping across the chamber, noting the wary glances and murmured exchanges between senators. He had expected this reaction. "We value our lives quite well," Julian said evenly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We simply don't see the need for armor in a place meant for discussion." Laughter rippled through some sections of the chamber, though it was not kind. Karkesh leaned forward, his obsidian-colored plating catching the light. "A naive perspective," he growled. "You assume words are always enough." Julian met his gaze without flinching. "You assume they aren't." Brancor clicked his mandibles. "Senator Carter, surely your people have been briefed on our traditions. In this chamber, disputes escalate. If consensus cannot be reached, strength must decide. Are you saying your species ignores this fundamental truth?" Julian exhaled, measuring his words. He had been briefed, of course. The Senate was a forum of law, but its laws were enforced through ancient customs, ones that favored physical resilience as much as diplomatic skill. When negotiations reached an impasse, it was expected that representatives would settle matters through controlled combat, not to the death, but enough to establish dominance. It was a deterrent, a way to ensure that those who made decisions also had the fortitude to stand behind them. It was a brutal system, but Julian had not come here to flinch. "I am aware of the customs," he said, "and I assure you, humanity does not ignore strength." Karkesh leaned back, his heavy armor creaking. "Bold words, but words are air. Flesh speaks truth." The chamber doors swung open again as two opposing senators, already armored for battle, entered the central floor. A dispute between their factions had stalled negotiations, and now, as per custom, combat would determine whose stance carried the weight of legitimacy. The air grew heavier as the two aliens squared off. The fight was swift, brutal. A clash of reinforced exoskeletons and clawed gauntlets. One combatant crumpled to the ground, gasping for air through a fractured breathing apparatus. The other stood victorious, earning the right for his faction's proposal to move forward. Julian watched without reaction. He felt the eyes of the chamber on him, waiting for a flinch, a moment of hesitation. He gave them none. As the fallen senator was dragged away, Karkesh turned back to Julian. And what would a human do in such a test? Julian held his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I suppose you'll find out." The murmurs returned. Whispers among senators who had dismissed humanity as frail and fragile. The idea that a human might stand in such a test without armor was almost unthinkable. But Julian knew something they didn't. A low hum filled the galactic Senate chambers as murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. The challenge had been issued. The human had not backed down. Karkesh, the Molthan senator, grinned, a slow, deliberate movement that sent hairline cracks through the jagged plates of his face. His kind did not smile for pleasantries. They did so when anticipating the breaking of bone and the spilling of blood. Julian Carter did not react. He merely rolled back the cuff of his suit, adjusting it with an almost casual air, as though this were nothing more than a routine debate. Brancourt clicked his mandibles in quiet dismay. Senator Carter, reconsider, the Veil d'Ar said, "Humans are newly admitted. If you suffer injury here, it will set a precedent. You should not." "I accept," Julian said simply. The murmurs rose in volume. The alien representatives turned their attention to the dual floor at the center of the chamber, a sunken arena lined with impact-resistant plating. It was a space designed for combat between species of all kinds, some with talons and exoskeletons, others with brute strength and reinforced carapaces. None had ever seen a human stand in it before. Karkesh rose from his seat, his armor shifting with a sound like grinding stone. "Then you will learn, human, that words are wind. Strength is law." Julian walked toward the center of the chamber, descending the steps without hurry, his measured pace in stark contrast to the imposing figure that awaited him. Karkesh's armor was thick, his frame twice the width of the human's. Every movement he made carried weight, and his heavy footsteps left faint indentations in the reinforced floor. Julian reached the edge of the dueling space, then removed his jacket. He folded it neatly and placed it aside. The simplicity of the action unsettled the watching senators. No battle stance, no activation of energy shielding, no careful calibration of kinetic dampeners. Just a man in a dress shirt rolling his shoulders, as if preparing for nothing more than a routine task. A sharp chime rang through the chamber. The duel had begun. Karkesh moved first. A lunge. Quick despite his bulk, his armored fist swinging in an arc designed to flatten anything in its path. Julian sidestepped, not a hurried dodge. A single step, effortless, his body slipping just past the strike. The force of Karkesh's missed blow sent a deep reverberation through the chamber floor. The gathered senators tensed. Karkesh let out a guttural sound, recalibrating. He stepped forward, throwing another strike, this time with his full weight behind it. A direct hit would crumple the bones of most species in the chamber. Julian leaned back. The punch swept past, missing by less than an inch. He exhaled calmly. The room fell silent. Karkesh growled and advanced again, swinging with increasing frustration. Julian slipped past every blow, weaving through the onslaught with a grace that was almost infuriating. He never stepped far, never made any unnecessary movements. It was precise, efficient, stand and fight. Karkesh roared, his plated fist hammering downward. Julian shifted. Karkesh's strike met nothing but the arena floor, the impact sending a deep tremor through the room. Before he could recover, Julian moved. A single, sharp strike. His palm met Karkesh's armored wrist, just at the joint where the plating segmented. The Molthan stumbled, unprepared for the force behind it. Julian followed up immediately. A second strike, this time at the gap between Karkesh's shoulder plates. A precisely placed impact, designed not to break, but to destabilize. Karkesh took an involuntary step back. A second, his balance was off. And Julian Carter had not been hit once. Whispers spread like wildfire through the chamber. Brancourt observed in stunned silence. Zilvor's golden eyes narrowed in sharp calculation. Karkesh snarled and lunged again, rage overtaking reason. It was a mistake. Julian met him head-on, this time closing the distance in a sudden burst of speed. He was inside Karkesh's reach before the Molthan could react. A sharp elbow to the exposed joint of the armor. A twist of movement that sent the larger combatant staggering. And finally, Julian pivoted on his heel and delivered a single, powerful strike to the base of Karkesh's rib plating. The sound that followed was a mix between a grunt and a choking gasp. Karkesh collapsed to one knee. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The towering Molthan, the warrior among senators, had been forced to kneel, not by brute strength, not by heavy armor or overwhelming force, but by a human, one who had worn nothing for protection, and yet had walked away untouched. Julian exhaled, straightened his sleeves, and took a step back. Satisfied, Karkesh growled low, but there was no immediate answer. Julian didn't wait for one. He turned, walking toward the edge of the dueling floor, retrieving his folded jacket. He shrugged it back on with practiced ease, as though the entire ordeal had been nothing more than a formality. Then he returned to his seat. The chamber remained eerily quiet. Zilvor finally broke the silence. His voice was softer this time, tinged with something resembling unease. Humans do not wear armor. Julian glanced at him, his expression unreadable. No, we don't. The Tarkelian senator's fingers curled against the armrest of his seat. His gaze flicked to Karkesh, still kneeling on the chamber floor, struggling to recover from the stunning efficiency of the encounter. Brancor leaned forward slightly, his chitinous fingers clicking together in contemplation. "It is not because you lack protection," he said, his voice almost reverent. "It is because you do not need it." Julian smiled just slightly. No one laughed this time. The weight of silence in the Galactic Senate chamber was suffocating. Julian Carter had returned to his seat, unscathed, untouched, his breath steady as if the duel had been nothing more than a minor exercise. Across the hall, Karkesh still knelt, the immense weight of his own body armor making it difficult to rise. A human had bested him, and not with overwhelming strength or superior technology, but with precision, with understanding, with something far more dangerous. Brancor, the Veildar senator, had not spoken since the fight ended. His multifaceted eyes had tracked Julian's every movement, replaying the battle with an almost scientific detachment. The clicking of his mandibles was soft but constant, betraying the churn of his thoughts. Finally, he broke the silence. This should not be possible. Julian turned slightly in his seat, regarding the insectoid senator with a neutral expression. And yet, here we are. Brancor's segmented fingers flexed against the stone-carved armrests of his seat. Humans were thought to be delicate, lacking exoskeletal protection, low in natural resilience. Your species does not excrete defensive toxins, nor possess regenerative capabilities like the Thalvor. And yet you stand. Julian leaned back slightly. You assumed we were weak because we don't cover ourselves in armor. That was a mistake. A ripple of discomfort spread through the gathered senators. Some shifted in their seats. Others, like Zilvor, remained unervingly still. The Tarkelian senator had not taken his gaze off Julian since the fight's conclusion. Karkesh finally rose, the grinding sound of his armor scraping against itself filling the chamber. His breathing was slow and deliberate, the rage in his molten red eyes tempered now by something else. Not submission, but understanding. "I was a fool," the Molten rumbled, his voice quieter than before. "I thought your people walked here unguarded, because you did not comprehend the danger." Julian studied him for a moment. "And now," Karkesh exhaled through gritted teeth, "now, I wonder if you walk without armor, because you are the danger." Brancor's mandibles clicked sharply. Zilvor, until now a silent observer, finally shifted in his seat. "It is not merely combat ability," he murmured, his golden eyes narrowing. "That was not mere brute force. That was calculation. Strategy." He tilted his head slightly, his elongated neck shifting as he regarded Julian. "Your kind, you learn. You adapt." Julian didn't confirm or deny it. He simply let the words settle. That was, after all, the true revelation unfolding before them. Not just that a human could fight, but that humanity was far from what they had assumed. Brancor exhaled slowly, a rare sound for his kind. "I had always considered the human admittance into this chamber a curiosity," he admitted. "A minor species, untested and proven, little more than a diplomatic experiment." He clicked his mandibles again, the sound sharper this time. "I now see that was short-sighted." Across the chamber, murmurs spread again, but they were different now. No longer dismissive, no longer amused. There was a shift, an awareness. The chamber had always been a place of power, where words were backed by the certainty that, if necessary, those who spoke them could stand behind their convictions with force. Strength dictated influence, and the humans had just proven they were stronger than anyone had anticipated. Zilvor exhaled, a slow, measured sound. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Tell me," Senator Carter, he said, his voice smooth, speculative. I have reviewed records of human history. They are extensive. Your species has endured plagues, wars, planetary disasters. You have thrived despite suffering. He tapped a clawed finger against the armrest of his seat. Is that why you do not wear armor? Julian met his gaze. He let a beat of silence pass before he answered. No, he said. We don't wear armor because it slows us down. Brancor froze. Zilvor's slitted pupils constricted. Karkesh's massive form went rigid. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them settled into the chamber like a growing storm. Humans were not reckless. They were not ignorant of danger. They simply did not see the need for protection in the same way the other species did, because their true advantage was not in their fragility, but in their ability to endure, to adapt. A slow, creeping understanding spread among the senators. Julian had won the duel without armor, not because he was stronger, but because he had understood how to fight within the system that had been designed to keep his kind at a disadvantage. And that was far more dangerous than brute force. Zilvor's fingers curled slightly. We were wrong about you. Julian allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Yes, he said. You were? The chamber sat in silence. The weight of the moment hung heavy. And beyond the quiet, beyond the careful contemplation of every senator present, something else had begun to take root. For the first time, the Senate was not looking at humans as fragile newcomers. They were looking at them as something far more significant, something to be feared. The Galactic Senate chamber no longer buzzed with idle conversation. The murmurs of disdain that had once greeted Julian Carter's entrance were gone, replaced by a charged silence. The senators, one so assured of their own superiority, now watched him with wary calculation. Julian remained composed, his expression neutral, as he leaned back in his seat. He had made his point. There was no need for further spectacle. Yet, in the wake of his victory over Karkesh, something new had settled in the air, something unspoken but palpable. Respect, or was it fear? Brancor finally spoke, his mandibles clicking together before his voice cut through the silence. This changes things. Julian raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting. The insectoid senator continued. Humanity has been underestimated. That much is clear. What is not clear, he tilted his head slightly, is whether that was your intention all along. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. The question was dangerous. The implication, even more so. Julian exhaled through his nose. You assume we had a plan, he said, his voice calm, almost amused, that we wanted you to think we were weak. Zilvor's golden eyes narrowed. Did you not? Julian let the silence stretch. The truth was far more complicated than they could understand. Humans had not come to the Galactic Senate with grand designs of deception or misdirection. They had simply been judged at a glance, deemed soft, fragile, unworthy of concern. And that had been the Senate's mistake. Julian folded his hands together. We didn't pretend to be weak. You just assumed we were. Karkesh, still standing but no longer looming, let out a slow, rumbling breath. And that assumption nearly cost me my pride. Julian met his gaze. Then don't make it again. The weight of the words settled over the chamber. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Zilvor exhaled sharply. Very well, Senator Carter. He leaned back, his claws tapping rhythmically against the armrest of his seat. You have proven your strength. That much is undeniable. Brancor inclined his head. And you have shown that humanity is not as unguarded as we once believed. Julian offered a small, unreadable smile. We never were. The tension in the chamber did not dissipate, but it shifted. No longer dismissive, no longer amused. It had been replaced with something else. Caution. Brancor's fingers clicked against the stone of his seat. There will be adjustments to how the Senate views your people, he said slowly. This much is inevitable. Zilvor nodded. Your admission was seen as an experiment, a gesture, but now the Senate will have to take you seriously. Julian tilted his head. Shouldn't you have done that from the start? Karkesh let out a low, grating chuckle, though there was no mockery in it this time. Perhaps. He crossed his arms over his armored chest. And perhaps it is for the best that we learn this lesson now, rather than later. Brancourt studied Julian for a long moment before finally speaking. "You do not wear armor." "Senator Carter," he said, his voice quieter now, more measured. "Because your species is the armor." Julian said nothing, because the senator wasn't wrong. The Senate had thought humanity fragile. They had thought the lack of armor was a sign of weakness. But they had never considered the truth that humans did not wear armor because they had never needed it, because they had spent their entire existence enduring, adapting, and finding ways to survive that no other species could comprehend. And now, for the first time, the Galactic Senate understood that. Julian rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket. "I believe today's session has been productive," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Unless there are further challenges to issue." No one spoke. Julian smiled, and then he walked out, unburdened, unguarded, and wholly undefeated.